Without warning, Princess Catherine placed the official palace statement face down on the polished oak table. Looking directly into the camera lens, she bypassed weeks of carefully sanitized public relations protocol to speak openly about the declining health of her 8-year-old son, Prince Louis. Tears traced down her face as her voice cracked, yet she refused to pause or allow the crew to stop recording. In a single unscripted minute, a decade-old Kensington Palace directive, one built on ironclad discipline and zero public display of emotion, was shattered. From the shadows just beyond the studio lights, Prince William stood frozen, his face drained of color as he raised a sharp, frantic hand to signal the production team to cut the feed. But no one moved. The machinery of royal secrecy, which he had meticulously constructed to shield his family, collapsed in an instant. In royal constitutional terms, a live, unapproved personal declaration overrides standard household clearance, leaving the communications office powerless to intervene once broadcast signals go live. This spontaneous rebellion instantly plunged the monarchy into an unprecedented red alert crisis. The Iron Curtain of Crown public relations had been torn down from the inside, leaving the institution exposed to a shocked global audience. Was this unscripted moment a mother's desperate bravery to protect her child, or a catastrophic failure that exposed the Crown's fragile illusion of perfection? Type 1 in the comments if you stand with a mother fighting for her son, or type 2 if you believe royal protocol must be preserved at all costs. Behind the heavy, gilded doors of Kensington Palace, a disastrous strategy had been taking shape for months, long before the public ever caught a glimpse of the cracks in the royal facade. To truly grasp the sheer weight of what transpired on that filming set, one must trace the story back to the fateful decision that ignited the wildfire. Driven by a lifelong obsession with institutional perfection and an enduring terror of media intrusion, Prince William executed a fateful choice that would shatter the peace of his household. He decided to conceal the true medical diagnosis of his youngest son, erecting an impenetrable wall around the child that prioritized palace security over human transparency. Ghostly memories of August 1997 still haunt the heir to the throne every time a camera shutter clicks. He vividly remembers walking behind his mother's coffin through the crowded streets of London, while thousands of lenses flashed in his face, watching her private pain and most intimate vulnerabilities exposed to every corner of the earth. That childhood trauma forged an unyielding, almost ruthless belief within his soul. He swore to himself that no medical record, no physical weakness, and no personal tears regarding his own children would ever become public property. When the young prince began displaying alarming signs of physical decline, William did not turn to standard medical avenues or public health care channels. Instead, he mobilized his senior household advisors to erect a fortified perimeter around the residence. Every private physician, specialist, and nursing assistant assigned to the child was summoned to a dimly lit study deep within the palace grounds. There, under the cold gaze of royal solicitors, they were forced to sign extraordinary non-disclosure agreements that bound them under threat of severe legal prosecution and the total forfeiture of their professional licenses. By royal decree, these binding agreements functioned as strict constitutional gag orders, legally preventing healthcare personnel from logging official patient files into the National Health Service database. Under established Crown prerogative, private medical treatments conducted within the sovereign household can be designated as classified state matters, effectively removing them from public oversight and judicial subpoena. This legal mechanism ensured that not a single piece of paper bearing the child's name could ever be leaked to the press or requested under Freedom of Information laws. Because of this extreme mandate, the 8-year-old prince was completely denied access to specialized pediatric medical centers. Essential diagnostic equipment that belonged in world-class hospital wards had to be smuggled into the residence inside unmarked wooden crates under the cover of darkness. Top medical specialists were brought in through back service entrances, stripped of their mobile devices at security checkpoints, and forced to conduct delicate evaluations in improvisational treatment rooms set up inside converted guest suites. The air inside those rooms was thick with unspoken tension, while the medical staff fought to stabilize the child in a high-stress environment lacking specialized hospital infrastructure. The palace communications team quietly began erasing him from the public record. One by one, confirmed appearances were struck from the royal diary. Major ceremonial events, family gatherings, and traditional holiday parades proceeded without the youngest child present. Whenever reporters noticed the absence, the press office filed his non-attendance under a standardized, coldly polite four-word formula regarding routine family rest, refusing to offer a single word of further elaboration. Silence, however, is a dangerous void in the age of global digital media and 24-hour news cycles. When a high-profile royal figure vanishes without a verifiable explanation, public curiosity inevitably curdles into deep suspicion and open hostility. Within a matter of weeks, the total lack of official clarity triggered an aggressive wave of toxic speculation across international news outlets, internet forums, and social media platforms. Tabloids began publishing increasingly unhinged conspiracy theories, alleging everything from severe familial collapse and hidden royal feuds to covert institutional scandals taking place behind closed doors. Senior communications advisors recognized the swelling storm outside the castle gates. Yet, rather than urging transparency or recommending a controlled disclosure, they doubled down on the deception. They advised William to hold the line at all costs, insisting that issuing even a brief medical update would invite relentless media scrutiny and open the floodgates to endless follow-up questions. They argued that maintaining complete, unwavering silence was the only way to retain control over the sovereign narrative and protect the dignity of the future monarchy. Paper statements were drafted by legal teams with surgical precision. Every sentence was sanded smooth and polished until it sounded reassuring while saying absolutely nothing of real substance. The press office deployed these sanitized documents as human shields, answering every frantic inquiry from journalists with frozen bureaucratical detachment. They treated the health of a young child not as a fragile human reality, but as a strategic asset that needed to be managed, contained, and guarded from the public eye. This extreme defensive posture ultimately backfired with devastating force. By attempting to protect his son from the prying eyes of the world, William unwittingly created the exact nightmare he had spent nearly 30 years trying to prevent. The impenetrable barrier of secrecy did not keep the world at bay. It merely transformed a sensitive private health matter into a full-blown constitutional crisis of public trust, eroding the moral authority of the crown day by agonizing day, while leaving an 8-year-old boy trapped in the dark center of the storm. Inside the heavily guarded sanctuary of Windsor Castle, the psychological toll of this enforced secrecy began to rot the household from within. While the adults debated media management strategies and constitutional protocol in drafty staterooms, the 3 children were left to navigate a terrifying reality in silence. The impenetrable wall built to shield them from the outside world had instead turned their private residence into an emotional pressure cooker, where whispers replaced normal conversation and every closed door signaled a new secret. The turning point occurred during a private rehearsal inside an empty reception hall at Windsor. The session was intended as a low-stress trial run to see if the young prince could manage the physical demands of an upcoming ceremonial appearance. There were no crowds, no flashing cameras, and no external witnesses present. Halfway through the morning, as he attempted to walk across the polished floor, his weakened body buckled under the strain. He stumbled, catching himself only by grabbing his mother's hand with trembling fingers. Looking up into her eyes, the 8-year-old boy did not ask if he was feeling better. He asked in a quiet, hesitant voice whether he was being kept away because he was too weak to be seen. That heartbreaking question exposed the dark psychological void created by the policy of silence. Deprived of any honest explanation about his condition, the young prince had constructed his own devastating logic. In his 8-year-old mind, he had concluded that his illness was a personal failure, a defect that embarrassed his family, and that he was being hidden away because his existence tarnished the flawless image expected of a royal prince. The physical pain of his condition was nothing compared to the crushing shame of believing he had become his family's deepest disgrace. This toxic atmosphere quickly spread through the nursery corridors, infecting the older siblings in profound and distinct ways. 13-year-old Prince George, mature enough to perceive the rising anxiety among the adults but too young to challenge it, retreated into an unsettling silence. He observed the covert medical visits, watched his younger brother take medication behind locked doors, and noticed the sudden shifts in conversation whenever he walked into a room. Believing it was his duty as the eldest to maintain order, George absorbed the unspoken dread quietly. He became hyper-vigilant, scanning every closed door and watching his father's tense expression, silently worrying whether his brother was disappearing forever. Under royal precedent, the psychological welfare of heirs to the throne falls under the direct supervision of the sovereign household, meaning internal distress is often managed through private domestic channels rather than external therapeutic intervention. This institutional tradition left the children with no safe outlet to process their fears, forcing them to devise their own survival strategies within the castle walls. 11-year-old Princess Charlotte responded to the crisis with a quiet, desperate resourcefulness. Noticing that her younger brother's laughter had vanished along with his public appearances, she devised her own secret system to reach him. Every evening, after the adults had retired to their quarters, she sat at her desk and wrote short jokes and silly stories in pencil on folded slips of paper. She slipped into his room under the cover of night, leaving these handwritten notes beside his bedside lamp. She had calculated on her own that making Louis laugh was the only way to pull him back from the darkness, working tirelessly without telling a single soul what she was doing. It was Catherine who finally discovered the devastating extent of the damage. Finding one of Charlotte's handwritten notes beside her youngest son's bed and observing George's sullen, anxious demeanor, the Princess of Wales realized the horrifying truth. The fortress her husband had constructed to protect their family was not keeping danger out. It was trapping their children inside a nightmare of isolation, shame, and fear, destroying their mental well-being in the name of institutional dignity. Late that night, behind the soundproof doors of their private apartments, the inevitable confrontation erupted between husband and wife. The quiet kindness that had sustained their marriage for over a decade gave way to raw, blistering anger. Catherine confronted William with the reality of what his secrecy had wrought, laying bare the psychological scars borne by all three of their children. She refused to back down, her voice trembling with intense emotion as she told him that their youngest son believed he was a source of shame. When William attempted to defend his strategy by citing the historical horrors of media exploitation and the absolute need to maintain control over the royal narrative, Catherine flatly rejected his reasoning. She declared that she would no longer play the role of a deceitful mother to preserve a polished royal facade. She argued that a mother's primary duty was to protect her child's soul, not the political prestige of the crown. The heated argument tore through the quiet night, shattering the lingering illusion that silence was a form of love, and leaving the future king staring at the ruin of his best intentions. Unable to maintain the illusion of secrecy any longer, Catherine sat down alone in her private sitting room and committed the unvarnished truth to paper. Bypassing the communications officers, legal teams, and senior aides who had policed every royal utterance for generations, she wrote in her own fluid handwriting. She described the harrowing months of clandestine treatments, the suffocating atmosphere inside the residence, and the heartbreaking reality of an 8-year-old child who believed his own illness made him an embarrassment to the crown. Once finished, she bypassed her husband's office entirely and submitted the handwritten pages directly to the sovereign. King Charles III received the private submission late that evening inside his private study at Buckingham Palace. The monarch was himself engaged in a highly public battle against cancer, a personal health crisis that had forced him to recalibrate his own relationship with royal transparency. He sat beneath the portraits of his predecessors and read through his daughter-in-law's testimony twice in total silence. When his eyes reached the passage detailing how his youngest grandson had mistook medical seclusion for familial shame, the king removed his reading glasses, placed them on the mahogany desk, and stared into the fireplace with cold, simmering fury. Having spent a lifetime navigating the rigid, emotionally distant machinery of the court, the king recognized the exact institutional pattern that had damaged his own youth. He saw an administrative machine that had prioritized institutional self-preservation over the emotional welfare of a vulnerable child. Summoning the senior advisors and medical directors responsible for managing the crisis, the king issued a swift and unprecedented punishment. He immediately dissolved the existing private medical panel, stripped the palace communications office of its authority over the matter, and placed the senior aides, who had engineered the blackout, on mandatory administrative suspension. Under unwritten constitutional tradition, the sovereign possesses absolute authority over the royal household's domestic affairs, meaning royal prerogatives allow the monarch to unilaterally dismantle advisory boards or override household decisions without parliamentary approval. In place of the disgraced advisory body, the king established an extraordinary decree. He ruled that a new public statement would be released based entirely on Catherine's handwritten draft. But he attached a historic condition that stunned the palace hierarchy. The entire statement had to be read aloud to Prince Louis in full, and the 8-year-old boy would be granted absolute veto power over its release. If the child expressed discomfort with a single sentence, the entire statement would be suppressed. Never in the 1,000-year history of the British monarchy had a child been granted sovereign authority over a state announcement regarding his own life. Catherine brought the final draft to her son's room the following morning. Sitting beside him on the edge of the bed, she read the words slowly, explaining precisely what the nation was about to be told about his absence. The young prince listened with a quiet, intense seriousness that belied his age. When his mother finished reading a line, stating that he was currently being treated by doctors and making progress, the boy raised his hand and stopped her. He pointed to the phrase, "being treated," and shook his head. He told his mother that he did not want people to think he was just sitting passively while doctors worked on him. He asked her to change the words to reflect that he was actively fighting his way back. On the spot, Catherine took her pen and struck through the passive phrasing, replacing it with the exact words her son requested, "getting strong again." An 8-year-old child had instinctively recognized the difference between being a helpless patient and being an active participant in his own recovery, choosing language that asserted his dignity rather than his frailty. When the amended document was returned to Buckingham Palace, King Charles read the child's correction. With a firm stroke of his fountain pen, the king added a handwritten marginal note at the bottom of the page, approving the text. The note stated that truth delivered with emotional honesty protects the crown far more effectively than cold institutional silence ever could. With that signature, a landmark royal document was officially authorized, forged not by political strategists or public relations executives, but by the handwritten agreement of a reigning king and an 8-year-old prince. The broadcast of Catherine's unscripted personal statement hit the international media landscape like a massive seismic wave, instantly crushing the malicious conspiracy theories and wild rumors that had festered across the internet for months. Across the globe, tens of millions of viewers watched in breathless silence as a future queen spoke with raw, vulnerable honesty about her family's private battle, shattering the icy detachment that had defined royal communications for generations. Yet, as the traditionalists inside Kensington Palace had long feared, the ravenous news cycle did not simply pause to offer sympathy. Instead, the media machine quickly pivoted from initial shock to relentless, invasive exploitation. Major television networks, cable news channels, and digital media platforms immediately began dissecting the brief video disclosure, frame by frame. Media executives brought on medical experts, body language analysts, and royal commentators to speculate openly on the precise nature of the child's underlying health condition. Broadcasters continuously aired old archival footage of Prince Louis from previous public appearances, using digital zoom technology to enlarge his face on screen and point out subtle physical signs of his declining health. On one prominent evening broadcast, a commentator framed a high-definition image of the 8-year-old boy taken at a public parade 2 summers past, systematically analyzing the child's posture and facial expression, while glibly narrating to a primetime audience what the boy must have been feeling at that exact second. Watching the live broadcast from his private study, Prince William reached his absolute breaking point. The heir to the throne stood up from his desk, his face pale with fury as he reached out toward the screen as if to physically shield his child from the commentator's gaze. Finding the remote control, he snapped the television off in the middle of the broadcast. Standing in the quiet room with his hands trembling in uncontainable rage, he turned to the 2 aides present and uttered 5 cold, lethal words that laid bare 30 years of buried trauma. His son was not public entertainment. That single, unscripted outburst captured the full tragedy of his position, watching his worst lifelong fears about media cruelty materialize on screen just days after agreeing to break his silence. Outside the heavy iron gates of the castle, however, the public response took a remarkably different and deeply moving turn. Rather than feeding into tabloid sensationalism, thousands of ordinary citizens began gathering quietly along the perimeter of Windsor Castle. They brought handwritten notes, bouquets of spring flowers, and thousands of handmade paper stars dyed in shades of soft blue. Each star carried the exact 3 words the young prince had insisted on, adding to the official royal statement, "Getting strong again." Over the course of 4 days, the castle barriers were transformed into a vast, colorful sea of quiet solidarity, proving that the nation possessed a capacity for genuine empathy that the cynical media apparatus had completely failed to anticipate. Energized by the global fervor and massive ratings surrounding the story, international news outlets immediately demanded follow-up statements from the palace communications team. Reporters submitted frantic daily requests, asking for specific medical diagnoses, detailed treatment schedules, hospital names, and official physician reports to fill their daily news columns. Catherine, however, stood her ground with unflinching resolve, having exposed the core truth to restore her son's self-worth and free him from the paralyzing fear of being a secret. She flatly refused to provide a single further detail to the press. She made it abundantly clear to palace advisors that sharing the reality of her son's struggle was an act of maternal protection, not a surrender of his fundamental right to medical privacy. Through her unyielding stance during those tumultuous days, the Princess of Wales successfully established a groundbreaking precedent for the modern monarchy. She proved to the institution and the world that a royal family can offer genuine emotional honesty without surrendering its dignity, drawing a clear, unbreakable line between necessary public truth and the sacred right of a vulnerable child to heal in peace. A few days after the public statement echoed across the globe, the true climax of this emotional crisis unfolded far from the glare of television cameras. Inside a quiet garden room overlooking the manicured grounds of Adelaide Cottage, Prince William went looking for his youngest son following an afternoon treatment session. He found the 8-year-old sitting alone on the rug near the French doors, staring out at the trees in quiet contemplation. No physicians, no senior aides, and no household staff were present to manage the moment or draft an official protocol. Rather than pulling up one of the high-backed, velvet-upholstered armchairs that filled the formal room, the future king made a conscious, humbling choice. He walked across the room, unbuttoned his jacket, and sat down directly on the wooden floor alongside his son. By lowering himself onto the rug, William physically eliminated the traditional hierarchy of authority, placing himself at eye level with the young prince as simply a father speaking to his child. He gently asked Louis how he felt now that the entire country knew what he was going through. The boy paused, his small fingers tracing the pattern on the carpet before looking up. What Louis revealed next completely shattered the future monarch's composure. In the flat, direct manner unique to young children, the boy admitted that during the darkest week of his medical evaluations, He had woken up late at night and heard his father weeping quietly outside his bedroom door. Sitting on the floor, the 8-year-old confessed that he had laid motionless in the dark, pretending to be fast asleep. He explained that he knew his father was expected to be strong and brave for everyone in the family, and he feared that if he let William know he had been overheard, it would cause his father even greater pain. To protect his parents' stoic dignity, an 8-year-old child had quietly carried the burden of his father's hidden grief for weeks, choosing silent suffering over causing emotional discomfort to the adults around him. That devastating confession broke through the rigid emotional armor William had spent nearly 30 years constructing. The heir to the throne realized with brutal clarity that his obsession with maintaining an illusion of unyielding strength had backfired completely. By hiding his own fear and isolating his family behind an impenetrable wall of secrecy, he had inadvertently forced his youngest child to play the role of protector, carrying an adult burden far too heavy for his young shoulders. Overcome with emotion, the future king reached out and pulled his son into a fierce, tearful embrace right there on the floor. He held the boy tightly, whispering that true bravery had never meant hiding one's pain or pretending to be invincible, but having the courage to speak the truth when staying silent felt easier. As they held each other in the quiet garden room, the extreme wall of secrecy that had suffocated their home officially crumbled away, replaced by an authentic bond forged in vulnerability, truth, and genuine emotional healing. By the 1st of August, after long months of quiet medical therapy and patient physical rehabilitation, the long-awaited moment of public return finally arrived. The family chose the bright, energetic atmosphere of the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow for their reappearance. There were no solemn press releases issued in advance, no elaborate royal fanfare, and no hyper-protective security cordons blocking the view. The Wales family simply walked into the arena, stands together, blending naturally into the crowd like any other family attending a summer sporting event. The 3 children walked side by side, holding hands tightly as they navigated the steps toward their seats amid a wave of spontaneous cheers from the astonished spectators. Prince Louis wore a simple navy cap, laughing freely and fist-bumping the game's mascot without a trace of the self-consciousness or shame that had once haunted his days in isolation. Watching his children sit together in the bright sunlight, Prince William accepted the most profound lesson of his adult life. He realized that true paternal protection does not mean building tall walls to conceal human vulnerability, but finding the quiet courage to stand beside your children in the light of truth. Inside the quiet archives of the palace, the gilded clinical thermometer that had once symbolized a father's frantic desire to hide his son's frailty was permanently locked away in a velvet-lined box. It remains there as a silent, enduring testament to a hard-won lesson in fatherhood and faith. Where do you believe the boundary lies between shielding a child's private suffering and fulfilling the public's right to royal transparency? Was sacrificing the crown's illusion of perfection a price worth paying for the truth? Leave your thoughts in the comments section below. If you found this deep dive meaningful, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications right now so you never miss our next behind-the-scenes royal analysis.